Today I'm going to go through 20 intermediate to advanced techniques for music production with Ableton Live. First tip. Use tiny unlinked envelopes to write automation patterns into the clip envelopes of audio clips. Try messing with the transposition, volume, and grain size. Different warp modes will help you make different weird sounds. Second tip. Place 3 or 4 identical Max for Live LFOs in a rack. And then call on that rack when you want to have some modulation on a few parameters. Try slightly offsetting the mod amounts on the LFOs to hone in the movement of the different parameters. Third tip. When resampling the same sound with a bunch of different chains, chop up the audio with slices first. That way, when you duplicate, and apply a whole series of effects to the different tracks, you have audio or MIDI tracks with the same slices in the same places. This should make it easy to mute parts of the track consistently across the whole group. And these slices will even hold if you do a freeze and flat. Fourth tip, as an added bonus to this previous setup, once you have everything in slices, zero out everything, and then just unmute the slices you want to bring back in. If you refreeze and reflatten, the silence will get aggregated together and is easy to delete the gaps. Fifth tip. Set your default audio track to be on resampling and with record armed. So you can always resample by creating a new track, soloing the thing you want to resample, and pressing play. To do this, right-click on any audio track and choose Default Audio Track to make that track a template for what happens when you press Command-T. Tip 6. Use instrument racks and chains to build complex morphing synths that you can control with one knob. In the zone selector, you can draw fades between the different zones to fine-tune the overlap. Tip 7. Remember that you can use the sidechain function of any native Ableton device to bring in audio from another track. Here's a useful example where I have a rack with two chains. One is completely clean and the other is muted, but it has a compressor on it which is listening to the drum group and therefore outputting drums to an envelope follower. You can see how I might use this chain to create a dynamically responsive EQ that moves with the drums, where I can route the modulation inline on that chain. I like to save this rack and pull it in whenever I want to use an envelope follower that responds to a different track. Tip 8. Use macros, Keyboard Maestro, AppleScript, Automator, or some other type of utility to set up shortcuts for repetitive keyboard presses. Here, I've implemented a command that slices audio with Command E and then presses the right arrow 16 times. This allows me to chop based on my grid size rather quickly. Tip 9. In arrangement mode, use the playback scrubber to find cool parts within your audio file. You can put a muted or silent clip next to the clip you're manipulating in order to anchor it in time, so that when you scrub through the clip, you don't go past that point in time. Tip 10. With complex, texture, and complex pro warp modes, you can use the BPM slider on non-beat oriented sounds to slide something to fit a particular gap in time in your arrangement. Rather than locking it to a number or tempo. This works pretty well with a cappella vocals, particularly in a remixing context. Tip 11. If you want to split something into highs and lows, instead of using an EQ and having overlap, you can use Utility's invert function in a 2-chain rack with identical EQs. This allows you to process the highs and lows independently without any overlapping frequencies. Tip 12. Use an empty MIDI track at the top of your project to more effectively organize and loop sections within a song. Because it's easy to select a MIDI clip and loop the selection. MIDI clips are a way better data source than those pesky launch arrows you can make on the top of the timeline. This is especially useful when grabbing an entire section of your song to be duplicated, moved around using cut or paste time, or just deleted outright. Tip 13. I don't know the math of it all, but it seems that changing your buffer rate in preferences affects both your overall latency for recording and monitoring and your available project resources for plugins and automation. In general, a lower bitrate means lower latency but higher CPU. A higher bitrate means more latency but less CPU usage. I often move between 128 and 512 in a project, so I don't have a ton of latency during recording, but I can fully leverage my machine and use my CPU resources to the fullest. Tip 14. When working with a complex arrangement, delete any additional scenes or clips you're no longer using. They take memory to store, and if they're not relevant to the track anymore, they are hurting your CPU usage. It's always worth pressing tab every once in a while to check session mode. Sometimes when you duplicate tracks, you create a ton of blank scenes within session mode. If you don't need these, get rid of them. They take up your resources. Tip 15. If you want to make divisions or dividers in your personal library, create a bunch of empty folders named hyphen, 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 hyphen. And then when you add these folders to your user library as folders, they will work as visual dividers. Tip 16. If you scroll in really close, make your tracks huge, and then turn on playback following, which is near the transport controls, your waveforms will look really groovy. Tip 17. When your song is already laid out in arrangement mode, but you want to jam out on another part, set the loop on the selection in arrangement mode and then use session mode to record your actual take. This way, the section you're jamming on loops. And you can record as long as you want, no need to get it right in 8 bars. But you also don't mark up your arrangement by creating a super long file. Tip 18. When manually chopping and moving around audio, it helps to have a muted track that you use only to host the audio you're pulling from. When you solo this track, you can hear it alone. Then grab the part of the track you like, then unsolo, put it on a different track, and hear it in the context with the rest of your arrangement without hearing the track that you pulled audio from. In one more click, you're able to solo that track and grab another part. Tip 19. Try duplicating effects in a row in order to amplify the effect without needing to dramatically alter the existing settings or parameters. I've found that sometimes this is particularly effective with 2 compressors in a row in order to get a really squashy sound that, to me, sounds different than a brick wall limiter. Tip number 20. Slice a track to MIDI. Insert a randomizer and set the value so that it will play any of the slices. Make a really short MIDI clip with all the same notes. And tweak some of the amplitude envelope values in the rack to get some really nutty, glitchy sound. Bonus points for resampling this in session mode and modifying the envelope parameters in real time rather than writing automation in manually. Those are my tips. I hope you've learned something.